We're not going to just assume that you're going to come in here, sit in a cube, punch a bunch of buttons, and then leave at the end of the day, and then you have your life outside.
Yeah.
Right? And there is a balance. There's boundaries that need to be set. We need to make sure that we are executing well and also taking care of ourselves, that we are human beings in an organization. We are human beings in a building, and human beings being within context.
Welcome to Evolve, a new era of leadership. I'm Carolyn Swora, your host, and today I'm really excited to be introducing you to our guest, Merritt Minnemeyer. Merritt is the founder and CEO of Master of One Coaching. And Merritt and I are going to talk about consciousness as an important and necessary component of one's leadership. Merritt's background in acting and as an international speaker really gives her a unique lens into this space. And so I'm going to ask her about that. You'll hear us speak into that. And we'll also hear a little bit about how her own personal life experiences have informed her work and what she does. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, Evolve listeners and watchers. Welcome to another episode. And today's guest is coming to us from the same time zone this time. I'm really excited to be bringing on Merritt Minnemeyer to the show. Merritt, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Carolyn. I'm so pleased to be here.
Yeah, well, Merritt, you and I both share a commitment, a passion to consciousness and bringing that into leadership and really feeling dedicated to helping leaders in particular find their full potential, which you and I both know is incredibly difficult at the best of times, let alone now. And I wondered if we could just start off by having you share your journey that led you to do this work.
Definitely. So, well, I would say that I was trained early and perhaps reluctantly as a young kid and a teenager. My mom would sit me down. We would fold socks, laundry at the end of the bed and watch Wayne Dyer on PBS when I was a kid. And it didn't even occur to me that was special at the time, but that was just part of the flow of our Sunday was to sit down and watch this. And so, and I think that, she always had a stack of books like I'm okay, you're okay, and that kind of thing on her bedside table. And I would definitely went through a period of like, oh, it's so annoying. I don't know why I don't think about all these things. And why can't we just, be in the moment? And
remind us Wayne Dyer, for those who don't know, remind us who Wayne Dyer is.
So Wayne Dyer was a wonderful thought leader, author, psychologist. I believe he's a psychologist, PhD. And he was really ahead of this self-awareness movement that started in the 70s. He was a pioneer of that particular wave of it. And so he wrote a lot of books and he had seminars, did talks, and he was also in recovery from alcoholism later in his life. So he had that lens as well. And he integrated a lot of Eastern philosophy, Lao Tzu and Buddhism and things like that. So he was very much served as a bridge from Eastern to Western culture, I think, and through this lens of psychology and self-awareness, quote, self-help, that was the terminology in the 80s and 90s. And actually I love the synchronicity of this, but he did a couple of films. The last one, which you can find on YouTube, it was just a few years ago, and it was filmed at Asilomar, which is a lovely beach resort, which is in my hometown. So
no way. Wow.
That was really cool. I was like, oh, that's so neat that he was sort of spent the last part of his life focusing on where I grew up, which just kind of felt full circle to me. But at any rate, so that was started early, and I definitely had a resistance to it. And also having had my parents divorced when I was 12, and I had some other traumas in my life. And so my mom definitely wanted me to have therapy, and I was somewhat open to it, but also kind of rebellious and resistant to it, and didn't want to be scrutinized. And it was just a lot, I didn't want to deal with it, at that time. Yeah. But the groundwork was laid. Then I went to school for theater. And so I always say that theater is like the greatest training ground to be human. It's great for business. It's great for human relationships. It's great for storytelling and understanding behavior, understanding tradition and culture. And so I think that I came at that from the lens of awareness of how people work. I wasn't necessarily super interested in how I worked at that yet, but I got a lot of great language and tools through the language of acting and art.
What would be an example of that, Merritt, as somebody who didn't spend a lot of time in the arts, but what would be an example?
Well, sort of the cliche example is, when we talk or we hear actors say, "What's my motivation?" Right? Like, why am I doing this? Really, what they're asking is, what do I want? Right? In the
Okay.
simple language, what do I want of this scene? And then how am I going to get it? What are my tactics to get it? And what are my obstacles? And that's the same language we use in coaching. It's, what do you want out of the situation, or what do you want as your goal? What are you going to do to get it? What's standing in your way, and how are you going to overcome what's getting in your way?
Right.
So from a theater standpoint, it's about how the scene plays out, the blocking, the staging of the scene. That's going to involve your behavior, your physical tactics. It's also going to approach how you deliver the language, the script. In life, it's actually pretty much the same.
Interesting. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
But our script is our own words, right? It's the words
Yeah.
that are authentic to us. It is what we want in our life or what we want in a situation, a relationship. From a leadership context, I'll give you an example. I have a client who's dealing with some pretty significant personnel situations this week. And it's been very nerve wracking for him because he's had a lot of disruption. And he's had to, every time he's had one of these difficult conversations, he just sits himself down and asks himself, okay, what do I want the outcome to be here? I want the outcome to be that everyone is on the same page, that we're clearing the air, showing respect and a common goal. And we're going to all approach it that way. So he goes in with that intention, and that way he can lead the conversation with that intention, with that energy,
Right.
if you will. So that's the
Yeah.
correlation there.
Neat. Sorry, I got you off track, but
No, that's all
that
right.
was
That's
really
all right. I
helpful.
mean, it is actually on track. It's just it's tangential, but it's still the
Yeah.
same theory. Yeah.
Yeah. And so some key sort of foundational pieces to your youth and your teens and I guess your early 20s. How did you find your place like in between now and that point into such deep levels of conscious, like wanting to focus on conscious leadership? Because not everybody uses that term.
Right. Sure. Well, and I always say that it's ever evolving, right? We don't arrive at consciousness. It's a
Yes.
process that we're going to continue throughout our life. And if you will, if you believe in the afterlife, I believe it's an ongoing process for however you contextualize that or believe it. I like to point to one specific transformational moment in my life that really turned the light on for me and got me out of the I don't want to and stop bugging me and why do I want to bother this and is this really worth it to okay. This is the
Right.
way I need to spend my life.
Right.
And 2011 my husband Peter was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, and he went through a 13-month process of treatment and surgery and chemo and radiation and all the things, and it was pretty horrific for him and also for us watching him go through it, trying to support him.
Yeah.
But of course, obviously, mostly for him, predominantly for him. And so it was very difficult to watch the person that I love most in the world and try to support him in this process and want to cheer for him, want him to come through it, want him to be okay at the end, while also watching him make some decisions along the way, like fighting for a long time, really doing his best. And then I watched him come to terms with, this is not the life I want to live. This is not the body I want to be in anymore. I watched him make those decisions a little bit at a time. And he was delicate about it. He didn't make a lot of noise about it, but just a little by little, as his body started to fail him and his mind was intact, he couldn't speak very well, but he was definitely aware and conscious and alert and very much himself. And so I started observing him, and myself being in denial about that. I really thought he was going to be an outlier.
Yep.
And because I had hope, and we have 3 little kids. They're now older, but they were little at the time. But I look back on that and I watched him really have a deep level of acceptance about that. So the night he passed away, it should not have been a surprise, but of course, no one's really prepared for that.
Yeah.
And a few hours after he passed away, I found myself on the kitchen floor in a family member's house where he had collapsed earlier that day. And I got an email from someone who had supported him through his process of treatment. And she had worked with him very closely. And she had written down the last words that he ever wrote. And in the email, it talked about how much he loved us and how grateful he was for his life and how he wanted us to go on and do wonderful things and embrace life, and how he didn't have any regrets, that he realized how beautiful every day was and it was a gift. And the last 6 words of the email were choose well, choose wisely, choose love.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so he was 40 years old when he passed. I was 35. And most times when I hear it, when I tell that story, people hear, oh, that's so lovely, well, wisely in love. That's really nice. And what I keyed in on was the word choose. Because to me, and for him to have the awareness that of choice in the last moments of his life, that it's all a choice, was so profound. And I thought to myself, if he can have that awareness, if he can choose love in this horrendous situation. And by the way, he had anxiety and depression most of his life. And then the last few months, actually, I saw him wiggle free of that to a large extent because there was nothing left to be afraid of. He was like, oh, okay, everything I feared is coming to be. So I guess I might as well, accept it. I mean, it wasn't quite that clean cut, but you know what I'm saying. He had a definite turn of he became free in many respects. And so I took that very seriously, not just as advice or as an offer, but kind of as a mandate, like a kick in the pants. Stop wasting your time trying to please others so much, trying to check the boxes, trying to do everything else you think you're supposed to do or should be doing, and start choosing what really is love in your life for you, for your kid, for our kids, for your work. And I just started applying it over time. Wasn't overnight. Over time, I started applying it first to myself. At what would it like to be choosing love for myself, and that involved a few things: severing some relationships, cleaning myself up, getting really honest about the things that I was doing that were destructive to myself and to my relationships. And then I had to choose a new environment. Then I, to raise my kids in that I felt was going to give us a clean start. And then I was able to choose love in relationships now, including my husband of 10 years now, Tom, who came to me also in his recovery from addiction with a similar language of choice and consciousness, different context, but similar language.
Yeah.
And we very much practice an intentional marriage, and it's not always easy. And we're not always great at it, but that's always our intention, our focus. And then I found myself choosing love in my work, and I asked myself, what would it be like to choose love in my work? And so I followed a path that took into consideration how I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, certainly my artistic background, and a few other components of that. I have certain skills and abilities in business and consulting, and also had a long stretch of time training leaders in facilitation arenas and doing that kind of work and education. So I sort of put all those things together and landed in coaching.
Wow. And with such a strong connection to purpose, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I saw on your website that somebody referred, or maybe you described yourself as like high whimsy, low BS.
Yeah, that was a colleague of mine, actually. So I cheated a little bit. And that quote is from like when I was in her mid-20s, but it's been my favorite quote of me, like a favorite description of me my whole life since then. I was like, that's the best thing anybody could ever say about me.
Yeah. Well, when we think of the word consciousness and bringing this into the leadership space and talking about it, I mean, conscious leadership, that term isn't new. I know conscious organizations, there's been a real movement over the past 20 to 30 years. I find, and I'm curious to hear what you think, that the concept of consciousness is seen as more critical for success these days, and there's more opening and acceptance for that term. What's been your experience with the leaders that you're working with?
I would totally agree with that. And there's definitely a lot of acceptance. There's still a lot of misunderstanding or lack of clarity about what it actually means. But people do lean into it more.
How would you describe it to your clients and people that you work with?
Well, simply put, it's the awareness of choice. So the more we have awareness about what makes us tick, what sets us off, what creates anxiety or anger or frustration or a joy in our life, the more we can act intentionally towards those or to accommodate those reactions. So if we are not in a position where we are choosing our responses, then we are reacting unconsciously, right? And we also tend to feel justified about that. Right. Well, of course, I'm defending this because I'm right.
Yep.
So in conscious leadership, we are constantly examining, am I right? Or is that just am I just being righteous about it? Is this instinct or is this fear? Is this wisdom or is this knowledge, or is it me having some sort of a reaction that isn't really applicable to the situation, but it reminds me, my brain is making a connection to something else.
Right.
Am I being thoughtful, or am I being set off in a fight or flight response?
So this notion, this conceptual level of consciousness, I think we can agree people are accepting it, getting curious about it. How do you work with your clients, or how can you share with us, how do you help people embody and step into this notion of consciousness in a more complete way than just conceptually getting it?
Well, that's a big question. There's lots of different tools and tactics and practices. So every individual is going to have a little bit of a different framework and preference about how they want to go about this. Traditionally, it's a couple of things. First is I start with an assessment called the Energy Leadership Index. Once I'm certified in that. And that just gives us a snapshot of how somebody reacts to their daily life when things are going well, and how we react to things when we're under stress. So that, but it is a snapshot. It's a dynamic. It's not a personality test. It's like a dynamic sort of sketch of like, okay, when things are this way, I feel that way, right?
Right.
And just gives us a baseline. And then we can set some goals from that point. And then it's a process of inquiry, a lot of questions. What about that is frustrating to you? What about that makes you feel joyful? What about that would you like to change? And whenever I'll give you this example with my client who is going through this personnel struggle right now. And I want to give him tremendous kudos because he has grown so much and his business has grown so much. And it's just such a joy to see. And so actually just this morning, we were having a conversation. He said, my instincts tell me X. And I asked him a question, how have your instincts to serve you in this way previously? And he said, well, sometimes I followed them and sometimes I didn't, but I always regretted when I didn't. Then he followed up with, actually, it's not instinct. I'm recognizing behavior patterns. And I was like, woo.
Oh, that's like golden, right? Like, was it on Zoom? Did the balloons all come
exactly.
down?
I know. I was like the gold stars just like flew. And that's really it, right? It's like being able to recognize patterns in other people, in organizations, in self.
Yeah.
And then when I recognize that, I can say, oh, is that what I really want to happen? Because once I recognize the pattern, then we have the choice to change it or not.
Right.
Or reinforce it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and also depersonalize it. If it's a pattern, it's not personal. It's not I'm doing it or he's doing it to me. It's like, oh, it's a pattern. Okay. So we've been here before. This time it turned out that way. I didn't love that. So what can I do differently to get a different outcome?
Why do you think, Merritt, that people are actually caring about these patterns anymore? Like, 20, 30 years ago, coaches didn't really have the same importance that they do for leaders as they do now. Why is it that leaders need coaching now more than ever?
Well, of course, I'm biased.
Well, so am I, but that's anyone who's listening hopefully is as well.
I would say everybody needs a coach at some point.
Yeah.
And also coming from the arts, this is not a new concept to me. Everybody has a vocal coach. Everybody has an audition coach. Everybody has an acting coach. I mean, this is not new. And in sports, of course, too. We watch the Olympics and all those coaches, every single athlete has their coach on the sidelines, right? They're talking to them in between events. The people who achieve at the highest levels and perform at the highest levels have someone or a team of people around them giving them feedback.
Right.
And that feedback can be part cheerleading and it can be part, hey, did you notice this? And do you want to change this? And it could be super nuanced, right? Depending on how delicate that feedback can be and how well what that relationship is like. Feedback can also be a blunt instrument, and that's not always useful because sometimes we're not ready to receive it, or we're not up for being, quote, criticized or corrected, right? But if we come from a coaching perspective, that is to say the relationship between a coach and a client is, I am here so that you can perform at your best. And hopefully your best gets better and better over time.
Yeah.
That is the relationship. You've engaged with me as a coach so that I can help you perform at your best. And that's a much different ask than someone coming in and going, you know what you did wrong there? Right.
Yep.
And I think that leaders are becoming very aware that the world is changing. Organizations are rapidly changing. The workforce is using their voice differently. They're demanding different circumstances, different environments, different structures. And it's changing very rapidly. And if leaders aren't able to handle those demands with deftness and also being able to take care of themselves, nothing's going to get done well, right?
Yeah.
because leaders are just people too. So they need that support too. They need to be able to say, okay, I may be able to see the field in a different way than somebody else, not in my position, but the stress is still going to impact that leader. And they're still going to be able to handle it.
That's the piece that I think isn't necessarily talked enough about when it comes to having a coach, be that at a team level or an individual level, is helping to mitigate against burnout. And I kind of want to take this conversation into a place of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And you made a comment to me when we met the first time about being stewards of our energy and intention.
Yeah.
And I just would love to hear you say more about that, because I very much think it's connected to our wellness.
It absolutely is actually essential to our wellness. And so, people sometimes, energies also get thrown around a lot as sort of this catch-all term. So what I mean by energy is how we're showing up, how we're taking care of ourselves. And it comes back to intention, right? So if I have the energy of, I'll use the Olympics again because I love the Olympics. So if I have the energy of, I'm going to do my best and I'm going to push the limits, push my own boundaries, and I'm going to see the field and I'm going to see myself crossing that finish line in record time. Right? That's a different energy than, oh my gosh, I'm so scared and I don't know about these. I can't show up against these other people and they're so much better than me, right? So energy in a sense, like physical energy, yes, that's taking care of our body, making sure that we move, making sure that we have good nutrition, making sure we have good sleep. This whole thing about like, I'm not sleeping and you wear that as a badge of honor. That's like way old news, right? That's not in vogue anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, people still do that, but it's not where it's at anymore. So there's that physical energy for sure. And that definitely directly informs our ability to show up with our mental energy. And if, and spiritual energy, if that's how you also, talk about yourself or talk about your soul and your spirit, if that's something that you are engaging in. Either way, though, it's really about that intention and that clarity of who do I want to be? Who am I becoming today? How do I want to show up that's different than yesterday? I love the concept, and I'm going to forget who wrote the book about getting 1% better. It might be Atomic Habits, I think. But there's a concept about can I be 1% better today? And I just think that's so lovely because it feels attainable. Right. And it's also, there's a momentum of like, oh yeah, I can do a little bit better today. If I'm 1% better today than I was yesterday at handling conflict or taking care of myself or building relationships. Maybe yesterday I walked in the building and I didn't make eye contact or say good morning to the person who's at the front desk. This morning I'm going to do better. I'm going to make sure that I look that person in the eye, smile at them, say good morning, thank you for being here.
And when you say better, what I'm hearing is aligning to my intention.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Because sometimes I feel like better is like this constant striving of I'm not good enough. But like I said, my sense with you is just more like alignment with that intention.
Yes. So thank you for that clarification. So better meaning, am I becoming a better version of myself as I define it?
Yeah.
As I define it. Right. And so intention and grounded in values. And that's the other piece of consciousness that I think is when we talk a lot about values and, people put their values up in their pillars up on their wall and it's like, we're all like family. Well, first of all, I have a thing about that. We're not family in a business.
Yes.
Unless it is a family business. And frankly, I'm not sure a lot of people want to be treated like their family. So I'm not a big fan of that.
We're on the same page on that one for sure. Yeah.
It can actually set people off. But what I think the intention of that is that we're going to treat each other with respect and as people. Right. We're not going to just assume that you're going to come in here, sit in a cube, punch a bunch of buttons, and then leave at the end of the day. And then you have your life outside.
Yep.
Right. And there is a balance. There's boundaries that need to be set. We need to make sure that we are executing well and also taking care of ourselves, that we are human beings in an organization. We are human beings in a building and human beings being within context. So 1% better today could be, maybe I do have a little bit more clarity on my intention today.
Yeah,
I'll go back to that example with my client. I mean, my intention today is to elevate the relationship I have with this one member of my personnel, my team. And it's been a little bit tricky. It's been a little bit conflict ridden. And I really would like to get that cleaned up.
Right.
Maybe that's my 1% better today.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm really aware that stress is impacting me in ways where it's coming out sideways to my team or to my family or to my loved ones or to my dog or whatever it is.
Yep.
And I know that's not really who I want to be. I don't really want to be that person that gets stressed because I got, mud splashed on me on my way to work. And so then I'm going to bark at somebody else. What I really want to be is somebody who treats other people with respect and kindness. So how do I be better about that? Oh, well, maybe I need to deal with the mud on my pants, take a couple deep breaths, maybe grab a cup of coffee or tea to settle myself into my groove, make the conscious choice to take care of myself and move through that. And notice I didn't say let it go, but move through it.
Yep.
Because letting it go that's a different thing.
Yep. And
then bring myself back to the person that is going to be kind and thoughtful with the people around me today.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I've always believed that people don't get up in the morning thinking I'm going to go to work and be a big jerk today.
No, I generally not. Yeah.
Yeah. For the most part, maybe there's a small subsection. What's getting in the way for people, in your opinion?
Oh, gosh. So many things. Well, okay. I'm going to break it down to a couple things. So I talk a lot about the fight or flight response, fight, flight, or freeze or appease response, which is the lizard brain, if you will, right? Our basic instincts for survival. And when we have a fight or flight response, I'm sure you probably talked about this before on your podcast. And I know you know about this, but just as an overview, it makes our body go into a very focused reaction to keep ourselves alive, right? So that means that I don't see past the end of my nose because I need to make sure that I get myself and my cubs into the cave before the saber-toothed tiger comes and eats them, right? Or eats me. But what happens, we have technology and society has evolved quicker than our physiology, right? So consciousness actually is the bridge between that reaction and our logical brain being online in the present. Right. And so when we have a fight or flight response, we don't in the moment necessarily know the difference between the saber-toothed tiger and a puddle of mud, right? Because we have this sort of low rumbling, constant stress that is impacting our everyday experience. And that is exacerbated by, there's a lot of wonderful things about being so connected, and everybody having a platform for their own individual voice and having awareness of what's happening in the world. There's a lot of wonderful things about that. The flip side of it is that we don't differentiate in our brain right away between an earthquake happening in the Middle East or a tsunami happening in Polynesia or a fire happening across the country and a fire happening in our house from a basic reaction standpoint initially, right? So our brain goes fire, and then we kind of go, wait, no, I'm okay. But there's something in our brain that doesn't resolve that all the way. Yep. And so it carries that alarm. And then, by the way, we also have, how many other millions of data points that we go through in a day, how many alarms are being set off.
Right. And this is all happening under our level of consciousness. That's by the way.
Right. So a couple of them will sneak through to the conscious level, but most of them are unconscious, right? Yep. And so we do things like we medicate through alcohol or through, drugs or through sugar or through fat or through or exercise too much.
Or buying too much.
Or right, this is where addictive habits come in. Or we get exhausted. And so then we go, and I'm certainly not immune to this. We go and grab a cup of coffee or 6 because we're so exhausted by all the adrenaline and all the cortisol that's running through our body all the time from these fight or flight responses. So that's the base level that most of us in the Western world are operating on, especially in work scenarios in corporate America or corporate, North America or the corporate world. And so add to that the stress of being productive and meeting quotas and sales, deadlines or sales marks.
Targets. Yep.
Because now that is also directly related to our survival. In our capitalist society, we equate money with survival. How much money we have is directly related to how I can take care of myself and my family. And sure, there's competition there. And sure, there's like, well, do we really need this much or want this much? But depending on where you are, what your environment is, need is relative. Yeah. Because I may not need, and I don't have a jet plane, I may not need that jet plane. But if I'm going to hang with the people who are setting the tone, setting the standards for my survival without the consciousness about it, and they all have jet planes, I'm going to start to feel like I need one in order to survive. Now, that's not a conscious decision, obviously, for most people.
Right.
And that's extreme. But it applies in lots of different circumstances. So all of those things together working, we're constantly churning with this, oh my gosh, I got to survive. And that puts an incredible stress on our system. And it really impedes our ability to have logic, sound thinking, to be able to take a breath. I mean, it actually physically impacts us in a way that our breath shortens, our heart quickens.
Yep.
So, and then we take caffeine, and we sugar, and then we like amp ourselves
Right.
up, and energy drinks, and right. So we're all like,
Yeah, and
walking
then
around this all the time.
we get stuck in the habit of all of that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think this interest, a long way around to say this interest in consciousness is like, is there a way to do differently and still be productive
Yeah.
and still make the money I need to make and still do the work I want to do? I mean, work has kind of gotten a bad rap, and certainly there's work that is less desirable than others, and that varies from person to person what that is. But work it can be a channel for our purpose.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And certainly it's a channel for us to express a purpose that is, maybe like my husband says, he doesn't feel particularly purposeful, like his soul doesn't get lit up by his work necessarily, but he does enjoy it. And he realizes that his purpose is taking care of his family. And so his work allows him to do that well. And so he goes to work thinking, I want to take care of my family today. And that's easy for him.
Yeah. I'm curious, Merritt, how many leaders, what percentage of leaders come to you with a clearly defined purpose?
That's a great question. So I have 3 criteria for people working with me. Number 1 is that they're a decision maker, usually the founder, but they're a primary decision maker in their enterprise. Number 2 is that they have a purpose that's greater than themselves and their bottom line. And 3 is they're not a jerk. Actually, is a different word, but they're not a jerk.
Yeah.
So by virtue of me having those 3 criteria, most of them come to me with some sense of having a purpose.
Yeah, I think that was probably a better way of describing it, a sense of purpose. Because if they're at that level of an organization, my sense is that there is a desire to lead and do well.
Yes.
For the most part. We know there are others driven by money and really talking about that kind of group of leaders. Do they have it really clearly defined, their purpose?
So some of them do. And I want to just speak to what you said about money versus purpose. And I actually believe that there is room for both. And I actually love working in the space where there's both. I'm a big fan of money. I don't think money's a bad thing at all. What I think what you're speaking to, though, is this sense of like money over
Exactly.
well-being of others, right?
Yes.
That is the be all end all. And we're just going to try to hoard as much money as we can at the expense of everybody else, right? So, and that's a complex set of thinking and decisions that is usually based in survival and some trauma.
Yep.
Believe it or not. And that's a whole other conversation we could go because I'm in the US, and boy, are we seeing that play out a lot right now.
Yep.
But anyway, I just want to mention this. There's a movement, which I'm sure you may know of, called conscious capitalism.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of it. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that. It was founded by John Mackey, who's one of the co-founders of Whole Foods Market, and a gentleman named Raj Sisodia. So I'm going to give them a shout out, and you should read the book and go find out more about what they're doing. At any rate, so I have a client come to me with, I'm very passionate about the environment. I'm very passionate about having a wellness in the workspace. I'm very passionate about moving things forward along a certain set of values that I have. And that doesn't necessarily mean that my clients all have the same exact values. For example, one client I have is in the trades. He runs a high-end business in the trades. And so he's, around building sites, and a lot of his personnel are people who have maybe a high school education, and they have a really high level of skill in their trade. And that's awesome. And what he says is, I want to create a great place to work. I want people to be coming to bang down our door because they know that we have the reputation for being, this is the best place in our industry to work. And I think that's so beautiful, And what he means by that is we take care of our people, we pay well, we offer great benefits, we have a high standard, and we're going to hold you to that standard. That's a good thing. That we want you to be able to reach for better skills and a high level of craftsmanship and all. Like, I love that about that. Yeah. So, and I do have some connection because my family history is in the trade, so I'm able to see that perspective too. But that's what he came to me with was, I'm growing my business. I know I need some support, and I want to make this the best place to work that I can. And I was like, that's awesome.
It is, yeah. And imagine what it would be like working for somebody or in someone's company who has that energy and intention that they're bringing into their job.
Yeah. And let me tell you, like, over the last 3 years, he's done such amazing work, and his level of the staff it's elevated so exponentially. It's so fun to watch that he's got this incredible team now of people who are smart and dedicated and talented and have diverse set of skills. And it's just, they carry themselves differently than they did 3 years ago. You know, they're just like, they walk in and they stand up straighter and they've got smiles. It's really beautiful. And that's because of his intention.
Yeah. Well, and I think it just comes back to when we are conscious about our intentions and where we're putting our energy, it has a ripple effect. It impacts the people around us, which is why I think if we kind of circle back to all we've talked about is to help create work and make work a place where we can enjoy and grow versus a place that depletes us and drains us and becomes like a pain in our butt.
Right. And we're going to spend what I think is like a third of our life at work.
Yeah.
I mean, so why not enjoy it? And I know that sounds like to some people who don't feel like they have a choice. And not everybody has as much choices as others do. I would assert that there are ways to bring about more choices, but it does take a ton of work and does take ingenuity and that intention. It's not easy. So I don't want to ever oversimplify that because not everybody's circumstances are the same.
Yeah.
And also, I have been witness to some remarkable stories of transformation. Remarkable. I have a mentor who talks about her growing up in poverty and enduring every kind of abuse you can imagine as a child, every kind of abuse. And she had one or two family members outside of that immediate family who believed in her, who taught her some things and gave her some hope. And that's where she took that hope and she built on it. You know, so it's really a powerful story. And so when people tell me, well, I think about people like this, my mentor, who there's every reason in the world for her to say I can't. And yet she chose differently. And not everybody's going to do that. And that's okay. But just to put that out there is like there are pathways.
Yeah, there is. And hope, I don't want to say hope can be a strategy, but hope can be pretty powerful.
Yeah. Hope is not a strategy, but it is an intention. And it is, I mean, we'll go back to that word energy, right? It's a motivator. It really is essential to overcoming anything else.
Yeah. Oh, Merritt, we could talk for, I'm sure, hours. What would you like to leave the guests with today in terms of some final messages about their own leadership?
Well, I like to go back to Peter's words about choosing well, choosing wisely, and choosing love, because they weren't just meant for me. They were meant for you, and they were meant for everybody listening here today. That was his intention. Peter was an incredible leader of the people around him. He was a brilliant teacher. He was an amazing performer. He impacted lives well beyond what he recognized because of his beautiful, vibrant energy and his deep love for people and his great passion for the work that he did and for the people he loved. And everybody around him would say, and still tell me, you know, to this day, 12 years later, say he was the best person I ever knew. And so I don't say that to be cheeseball, right? I say that because he was very clear in his last moments. Choose love. And that is a strategy.
Yeah. It absolutely
and it doesn't, and it sounds hokey perhaps, but you can choose love in your corporate job. You can choose love at the gas station. You can choose love at the grocery store. You can choose love when you're frustrated with your kids and they're driving you crazy. You can choose love, even if it's taking a breath for yourself and say, okay, I'm going to come back again rather than lose my top, blow my top and yell at them.
Yeah.
That is a strategy.
At the very least, we can choose to love ourselves.
Yes.
First.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would actually assert it's not the least, it's the most. Because most of us aren't very good at that, right? But when we start to choose love for ourselves, we start to really care about how I am, how I feel, who I be, then other things become easier from that point forward.
Oh, Merritt, thank you so much for coming on the show and just sharing your story, sharing those words from Peter and your insights about working with leaders. How can people listening find you and reach out to you if they'd like?
I really appreciate you asking. The best way is to go to my website, which is Master of One Coaching, coaching.com. And there you can get a free impact session. And what that basically means is 30 minutes with me, bring something that you're stuck on. We'll work through it. We'll get you to on the path for solution. And you can see what it is to work with me. And if you don't want to work with me anymore, that's okay too. But I can point you in the right direction. Also, there you can sign up for my newsletter, which is sent out about once a month. I do not spam people. It's once a month, by your election.
Yeah.
And then also LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Perfect. Well, we will make sure that all of those links are in the show notes. And before we let you go, though, Merritt, I ask 3 questions to every guest that comes on the show.
Yeah,
Are you all set for those questions?
absolutely.
All right. These 3 questions revolve around my book, Evolve. And I think there's these sort of 3 core elements that can help guide people, essentially, if I bring it back to our conversation, to higher levels of consciousness and intention and managing their energy. So the first one is around self-awareness. And I find that when we can share and hear each other's stories, we realize that we're not alone. And so I always
Yeah.
like to ask people to share an anecdote, a story, something you feel comfortable with, just a short perspective on a time, an experience that took you from one level of self-awareness to a completely new level.
So just briefly, a couple weeks ago, I was in Canada for a
Yay,
leadership
Canada.
a leadership event that was run by my colleague Jonathan Carroll. Shout out to Jonathan. It's called the Dragonfly Club, and it was 5 days in the Lake Muskoka region in Canada. Beautiful
It is.
area and so peaceful and so healing, just to be there for the soul. And I found myself sitting around a campfire with 4 guys who I'd never met in person before. I'd met 2 of them online. 2 of them I had only met in person for the first time this week. And it was about 1 a.m. It was me and these 4 guys, and we were just, playing around and like making silly jokes and talking about how the week is gone. And I had this moment of awareness, and I poked my head up and I said, guys, I have to tell you, this is the safest I have ever felt in my life in a group of men. And it was so powerful to just be with these 4 conscious men, intentional, kind, thoughtful, funny, smart men who are coming together just for the sake of community. And I have a lot of wonderful men in my life. I don't want to say that I haven't. Obviously, I've told you about Peter, my husband now, Tom, lots of wonderful men in my life. And because of previous trauma, I have had an underpinning of not safe that has come up in various places. And to have that moment where I was super, like, just really the salient clarity of safety was transformational.
Oh,
And I've brought that back over the last, just been a couple of weeks, but I'm noticing how that conscious moment has informed how I show up every morning. Like, oh my gosh, I feel safer in the world. Oh my gosh, I can be more present with my husband because I feel safe. Again, I was never not safe with him. I'm just saying this piece that sort of fell into place for me.
It's like your body sort of is organized at a different level now.
Yes, exactly. Like a domino just fell that was an old domino.
Yep.
And a pre-conscious domino, certainly.
Yeah.
And it fell and knocked over all these other dominoes. That was like, oh, okay. And what that does is not just safe from a sense of fight or flight, but it's a safety in a sense of trusting myself.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. And I really appreciate too that sometimes we can refer to big moments in terms of awareness. And it sounds like that was potentially an ordinary moment.
It was,
but
yeah.
your
It was,
awareness of it allowed the awe and beauty of it to really show up.
yeah. I mean, it was just us sitting at a campfire late at night. It wasn't anything. There was no ceremony. There was no, I'm going to heal this. It was none of that. It was just like,
right.
huh, okay.
Yeah.
It was just
Wow.
community, it was community. It's cool.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Second question has to do with self-regulation. How do we stay present? How do we stay calm? And curious if you have any routines or rituals that you turn to help you.
I have a few. Meditation is really important in my life, even if it's just 5 minutes or 2 minutes where I know I need to reset myself.
Yeah.
I've spent much of my life denying my connection to intuition in my spiritual life. And again, I know this isn't for everybody, and most people have a different way of, it's very personal. It's very personal how people contextualize this. So I'm not going to proselytize, but I will say that my connection to my spiritual life and my connection to my intention, I've really been nurturing that of late. And it has made such a profound difference in, again, this sense of trusting myself, and that I don't have to have it all figured out, and that I don't have all the answers, and that's okay. And the answers I do have come to me in quiet moments.
Right. Right. Does that practice, that spiritual practice, is that through meditation, or are there some other things that you do to make that connection?
Different forms of meditation. So I
Mm,
would say meditation just on its own. Sometimes I have a focal point like a candle, or I like to burn incense or something
right.
like that, just to kind of give myself a different sense of being in a different place. It
Yeah.
sort of changes the environment a little bit. Yoga, when I get to
Mm,
it. I've
yeah.
not been so good about it this summer.
Kind of hard with 3 kids. Yep.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
and also of course meditation at the end of yoga, that receiving
Yeah.
after you put all the work in, and then you have that last few minutes where you get to receive and get into I'll go blissed out. I also love engaging in witnessing the spiritual practice of others. I never want to appropriate that. But I really not but and I really enjoy learning. And so if I've ever am invited into somebody else's spiritual practice, they bring me to their church or their place of worship or whatever, I so enjoy that because I just think that there's so much richness there, and there's so many through lines. We really are
Mm,
saying so much of the same thing. And
right.
so I do also love that. I love and I also read a lot about consciousness because I'm a nerd.
Well, and I think it's funny that we kind of landed in this place of talking about spirituality as a piece of your practice, because we can't get to higher levels of consciousness without some sort of connection in our own personal way to something, bigger than ourselves. And it's an important part of our energy field as well.
Mhm,
And hey, we're all on our journey in terms of what that looks like for ourselves. So yeah, so it's just interesting how that came up in this question.
mhm.
It kind of leads me to my last and final question, which is this idea of being connected to something bigger than yourself. So sort of helping us co-regulate, being in connection with others. What is a song or genre of music that really helps you feel connected to something bigger than yourself?
This is a tough question because it's hard to narrow it down. So I will try to be brief and say a couple of things. One is I remember being maybe 10 or 12 years old and singing in a Christmas concert with my choir. And so I'm being in the theater, I'm a trained singer. And so music is always a part of my life, my family's life, and still is part of my life, big part of my life. So I think that particular Christmas concert, I became aware of. It was one of those moments where you just everyone's sort of locked into flow, and it was kind of one of those magic things that happens with music, where you're just like, oh, you're sort of transcending the current moment.
Yep.
And it was the first time I ever had that experience. So I'm not even sure what song it was, but Christmas music sometimes brings that out of me because I have that memory, and it's just
Yes.
if in the right environment and the right, candlelight and the smells and
Yep.
I love that sort of feeling of coziness and candlelight and that memory of being of transcending as a child. Also, being a musical theater person, certainly things like The Greatest Showman, that's one of my like hypes, songs. And it's super cheesy, but it works. I mean,
It
there
does.
is science behind why music elevates us. There's
Yep.
actually Peter Gabriel's daughter has started a foundation for research and proliferation of the data that we know about how music can change our brain state. And
Mm.
it's a beautiful book and foundation, and I highly recommend you all check it out.
What's it called? All
So
right.
the book is Do Everything Better with Music. And I think the reverberation is the foundation, I think. And the author of this book is Keith Blanchard, but the foundation, the organization that is backing this information, this and spreading these programs is Peter. So the foreword is by Peter Gabriel. It's his daughter who's has founded the organization. And it talks all about like why music does what it does and how we can use that to our advantage and how we can use it in the workplace and how we can use it in our life and how listening to one song or a set of songs can actually physically change our brain and physically change our
Oh,
mood. Yeah.
I love music myself. I mean, I think so many people say that, like have that connection. And I really appreciate talking to people who have a performance or theater or like artistic background, because then I find out, we all find out things like you just shared, that there's
Yes.
science behind this.
There is. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And then one last thing I wanted to say about the music is, so when I was going through the depths of my grief, I had a playlist that I was playing over and over again, and it was Jason Mraz
mm,
and Pink and a few others on there.
yeah.
And what I appreciated, like I was fortunate to see Jason Mraz play with the Boston Pops, the
Yep.
Boston Symphony Orchestra, a few weeks ago, and I've seen him play a few times. I just adore him. I adore his music,
Yeah.
and he's, and my husband, who is, a little more into the nitty gritty than I am, he's like, I get it. I mean, he's very charming and I understand, I can see, and he's like, I noticed that there's a sea of women in this audience and there always is. And they're all sort of losing their minds. Usually women our age, they're not kids.
Yep.
And I said, it's not, first of all, he's obviously very talented. There's lots of very talented musicians.
Yep.
What I appreciate about Jason Mraz is not that he's like bubbly and sweet and bubblegum and it's that he has made a choice. He makes a choice every time he plays to show up and bring joy. And he's very clear about that being a choice. There's lots of different kinds of music he could perform. There's lots of different bands he could play with, right? And it does seem kind of syrupy sweet on the surface. But what if you know a little bit about him, you know that he is very consciously bringing joyful music and positive messages out in the world.
I don't know much about his background, but that is my sense with his music there's a depth to it. I'm really curious to know your playlist now too. Yeah. You mentioned Pink. I'm going to see her in concert next week.
She's amazing.
And I've seen her several times and I go see concerts. I was just at one last night, like at least one a month, usually 2 a month.
Yeah, we do too.
And Pink is one where I will invest a larger proportion of money. And I find the experience being up close and sort of that close to the performance brings a whole other level of music, but kind of similar to what you said about Jason Mraz, whether or not you like Pink as an artist is sort of like secondary to this, is there is an authenticity and there is just a real presence in being in the moment. Mm-hmm. And when you're that close to the performance, she's not intoxicated. She's not under any sort of drugs. And I've seen lots of performers who are, and hey, like do your thing. But there is this real genuine
presence,
peace and presence to her that is just, I think that's performers that can sink into that space in their own authenticity and level of consciousness. Mm-hmm. That is the piece of connection that people crave and will pay money for. And if I just kind of circle back to leadership, that's the type of connection that I think people are looking for in our workplaces as well.
I totally agree with that. 100%. And I would say, it doesn't have to be pop music. It could be anything. I mean,
exactly.
I was at a conference a few weeks ago and Renee Fleming, the opera singer, was speaking about her new book about also that music in the mind, I think it's called, and about the power of music, also another great one. And a lot about the data behind it and why we need to put it in schools and, it should be part of every child's education. Yeah. And one of the things she said in her talk was that she's engaging in a practice of having one aesthetic experience every day.
What does that mean?
So meaning that she goes and she will read poetry intentionally, or she will go see a concert, or she will go to an art gallery, or she will watch something that she knows she's going to be, uplifted by, but it's intentional. It doesn't have to be expensive, right? Yep. It could be something, it could be for free. You could go see everything in the park, or but one thing intentionally, one aesthetic experience every single day, because it feeds our soul as human beings. Yeah. And we are so quick to dismiss that. I'm too busy. I don't have time. I don't have money. Yep. It does not have to be something that you have to spend a lot of money. You could, but you don't have to. So I love that challenge.
Well, it's making me, I just went to the Art Gallery of Ontario for the first time last weekend. And I bought a season's pass. So yeah, I'm going to take that with me too. I love, Merritt, how the closing 3 questions has just sort of spurred into this other whole conversation. So as much as so for all of you listening, I encourage you all to reach out, connect with Merritt and her great work. And Merritt, thanks again for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful, and it's such a pleasure.
I'm kind of giggling at how the 3 questions of Evolve that I ask at the end of the session are really meant to wrap up the conversation. And for Merritt and I, they seem to take us off into a new tangent. I hope that you enjoyed that expanded ending of the show, digging into music and really how scientifically, how it helps us feel connected. I've had several guests on the show talk about conscious leadership. And I'm doing that intentionally. I think it's really helpful to hear how this word consciousness is described by different people. And in this case with Merritt, I love the simplicity of what she said. Consciousness is choice, and that we have choice in perhaps more things than we realize. We have choice in our reactions and our responses. I'd love to know what you think of the episode. Feel free to leave a comment about the show on whatever platform you're using. You can also reach out to us at hello@carolinswora.com. Thanks so much for joining this episode. And if you like what you're listening to, please press subscribe. And you can find out more about me at carolinswora.com. And maybe even consider signing up for my weekly newsletter. I like to make it really, really practical and help you each and every day become the conscious, wonderful, evolved leader that I know you are. Take care.